Welcome back to another episode of the IFC's Individuation podcast. I'm Dr. Lahab Al-Samarrai, and with me, as always, the Chain Gang. Lisa Hong is here with us, and Eric Tomlinson is also in our bottom square today. We're going to keep him in the bottom square. We're not going to move him up anymore. Okay, so we're back, as always, and this week, we are on chapter 7 of Franz's Archetypal Symbols and Fairy Tales, The Hero's Journey. And this week we are going to be talking about the Virgin Tsar. So without further ado, Lisa, take it away, my dear.
I'd be happy to. Fairy tale hails from the Slavic regions again, called the Virgin Tsar. Once there was a Tsar who had 3 sons. The first one was Fyodor Tsarevich, the second, Dmitry Tsarevich, and the other one, the last one, Ivan Tsarevich. One day, the Tsar gave them a memorial feast and addressed his assembled generals and counts. "What do you think, gentlemen? I have 3 sons. Which of them is able to pluck my flowers and follow in my footsteps?" The eldest son, Fyodor Tsarevich, stepped before him and asked, "Dearest father, give me your blessings and permission to pluck your flowers and follow in your footsteps." The Tsar was pleased and asked him to proceed. He ordered that his best horse be fetched from the stable and given to his eldest. His servants went to the stable and brought out the best horse, saddled and bridled it, and the bold lad rode out into the open fields. He came to a pillar at the crossroads, and on this pillar it was written, "He who takes the road to the right will have plenty of food, but his horse will remain hungry. He who rides to the left will remain hungry, but his horse will be satiated. He who takes the middle way will suffer death." Fyodor Tsarevich thought hard and then took the right path. He came to a mountain of copper, dismounted from his horse, and climbed the mountain. Reaching the top, he wandered all around but could find nothing more than a copper serpent, which was, however, very beautiful. He put it in his pocket and went back to his kingdom, and he came unto his father, joined him in the secret chambers, and showed him the copper serpent. The Tsar grew angry and shouted, "What sort of monster did you bring me here? It will certainly destroy our kingdom." After this, the Tsar was very angry for a long time. But then he eventually became more cheerful. And one day, as he was walking in the garden, decided to again call for a special feast. It was a great banquet and all got drunk. In the middle of merriment, the Tsar rose and said, "My lords and generals, dukes and counts, although my children are all grown up, none of them has yet been able to pluck my flowers nor follow in my footsteps." Then Dmitry Tsarevich, the second son, stepped forward. Bowing to his father, he asked him for his blessing and said, "Honorable father, give me your blessing and permission to pluck your flowers and follow in your footsteps." The Tsar was pleased and ordered his best horse be given. Dmitry Tsarevich came to the crossroads and took the left path, saying, "My steed will be fed, and then maybe he can help me out of trouble." He came to a great edifice with gold-plated columns. A maiden ran up to him, greeted him in the most polite fashion. The tables were richly covered with all sorts of delicious food. The hostess urged him to eat his fill and brought drink and all he desired. When he finished, she brought him to his room to rest in a luxurious bed. But no sooner had he laid down than she turned the bed upside down and flew him down to the basement. The Tsar waited and waited for his son, and when he did not return, was sad for a long time. Then he organized another great feast, at which he announced, "What do you think, my lords and generals? 3 sons I have brought up, and no matter how eager and diligent in the service of the kingdom, none of them have yet succeeded in plucking my flowers or following in my footsteps." Then Ivan Tsarevich rose up and came to his father and asked for his blessing. "Oh, Ivan Tsarevich, son of the Tsar, your brothers are stronger and cleverer than you, and what have they brought forth? You would do better to lie near the stove and not worry about strange adventures." But Ivan Tsarevich leapt up and continued, Dear father, magnificent lord, if you grant me permission and give me your blessings, then I will ride forth. If you do not give me your blessings and withhold permission, then I will still ride out. So the Tsar ordered to give him the best horse that remained, so he could ride wherever he wanted to. Instead of the best horse, Ivan Tsarevich chose an old mare. He mounted the old mare and sat with his face turned towards the tail. All the men of the court laughed at how the Tsar's son rode out in such an awkward and unfitting fashion. As soon as Ivan Tsarevich came out to the open fields, he pulled the nag at the tail and hung the skin out on a nail. Here you have her, crows and magpies. God has provided you with a meal. Then he roared like an animal in the forest and whistled like a dragon. Soon a horse came galloping so that the moist Mother Earth trembled. Flames blazed from his mouth, sparks flew from his nostrils, smoke poured out of his ears, and steam rose from his nostrils, and steam rose in pillars. Fire apples fell from its behind. Ivan Tsarevich took this loyal steed by the reins, stroked it, and suddenly it became so quiet that a lad of 3 years could have sat on it, and indeed would have been able to ride it. Then Ivan Tsarevich went into the great deep cellar that his dear grandfather had given him and ate and drank his fill. He chose a most beautifully plaited bridle and a Circassian saddle, mounted this on his gallant steed, pulled the straps tight, picked up his sharp sword, rose up on his steed, and rode out into the open fields.
And he rode until he came to the same pillar at the crossroads where his two brothers had come past. He chose the middle path that had written, He who rides down the middle road will suffer death. Ivan Tsarevich began to weep. He pulled himself together and thought, neither honor nor glory endorse this brave lad. He will ride into the jaws of death. With powerful bounds, he sprang across the open field and drove his good steed onwards. Rivers and lakes passed under the hooves. The horse's mane flowed in a grand arc. His tail swept over the earth. The horse and rider soon came to a green meadow and saw a cottage turning around on legs of a chicken with spindle feet. The young man called out, Stay still, little hut. Turn your back to the forest and your door towards me. The hut spun around until its door was right in front of him, and then it stood still. The daring lad jumped down from his faithful steed and cried, I do not want to stay forever, but one night only. I will go in and will soon come out again. And the young hero went into the house, touched the cross as it was written, and bowed as was the custom. Inside sat a little old grandmother. Poking the fire with her nose, she stirred the coals in the oven. With her eyes, she watched over the geese in the field. With her hands, she spun silk threads. Fee, fee, fee. So far, the black raven has never brought back any Russian bones here. But now a living Russian himself stands before my very eyes. How is it with you, child? Did you ride here on your own free will or by compulsion? The young man jumped at the old woman and said, I will smash your ears together. Your asshole will become the stove door. I will grind your brains with my hands until sand flies out of your ass. My dear old one, you should know that you do not question a hero, but serve him with food and drink. The old hag set the table, fed and gave drink to the Tsar's son. She prepared a place for him to rest and then asked, Do you ride here on your own free will or by compulsion? And he replied, Willingly. but thrice as much willingly. We were three brothers. The first rode out and brought home only a copper servant from the Copper Mountain. My father, the Tsar, threw this brother in jail. The second rode out, and we know nothing about what happened to him. And then I had to take on the service myself, to pluck his flowers and to follow in his footsteps. Tell me, dear grandmother, did our father ride far in his time? Lie down and sleep, my child. The morning is wiser than the night. The day brings rewards. In the morning, the old woman woke the brave young man, gave him food and drink, her own good horse, took him out on the road and said to him, my elder sister still lives down the way, and she knows more about your business than I. He blasted off on his steam and passed rivers and lakes and came to green fields as the day was drawing to a close. Then he saw a little hut standing in the field. It was perched on one bison's leg and a distaff. Little hut, stand still. I do not want to stay for long, only until the night is gone. I am coming inside, and I shall come out again too. The little house stood still with its back to the forest and its front door towards the rider. The young hero jumped down from his loyal steed and entered the hut, and there sat a woman even older than her sister. She was spinning silk threads, stirring the coals in the oven with her nose, and watching over the geese in the field with her eyes. She asked the same question as her sister, and Ivan Tsarevich swore back at her in the same way as before. She gave him food and drink, and again they had the same conversation. In the morning, she gave him food and drink and her own gallant steed. The horse he had ridden, she kept for herself, and mounted upon this one, she accompanied him out into the open field and said to him, my elder sister still lives down the way, and she knows more about your business than I. Once again, the bold lad rode on, ever urging his steed forwards. From mountain to mountain, from hill to hill, rivers and lakes passed under hoof until he came to the house of the third sister. Again, he had the same conversation, her as with her sisters. Early next morning, the old woman woke him up, gave him her own trusty steed, led him to the road, and instructed him, ride forth, my child. Around midday, you will come to the kingdom under the sun. There rules a virgin as Tsar. She is called the beautiful Marya with the long tresses. Her bed is raised on 9 pillars. She sleeps on this resting place until noon. But then you must be quick and jump straight over the walls of the city. In the garden, there stands a young apple tree, and nearby lies the water of both life and death. For this reason did your father once ride here. Fill 2 glasses, one with the water of life and one with the water of death. But first test their power. Rip apart a young raven. On the right side of the pool is the water of life. On the left hand, the water of death. Ivan Tsarevich rode off and came to the kingdom under the sun. He went into the garden, caught a young raven, and tore it into 2 pieces. He sprinkled it with the water of death, and the raven's body grew back together. Then he sprinkled it with the water of life, and the raven flew away. Now the young hero wanted to enter the chambers of the Virgin Tsar, Marya the Beautiful, with the long tresses, and observe how she slept until noontime. He wandered through the halls and rooms and saw how all the young chambermaids slept on their beds. And then he came into the chamber of the beautiful Virgin Mara with the long tresses. The maiden was more beautiful than he had ever imagined. When she drew in her breath, the doors closed. When she let her breath out, the doors opened again. What does my honor matter? The young hero said in his heart. I'll give my horse to drink by this virgin. He could see her perfect body right through her nightgown, right through to her heart. He was on fire and wished to fulfill his pleasure. The maiden noticed nothing of what he had in mind, and he lay with her and took his pleasure. Then he went softly and quietly out of the chambers and came to a wide courtyard. There stood his horse, and it was very tired. He led it to the well and washed it with fresh water from head to foot. He then gathered the apples of youth from the apple tree, filled his knapsack, drew the water of life and death into 2 glasses, and rode out of the realm as fast as he could. As he mounted his brave steed and they sped away, he spurred on, striking its strong thighs, and they sprang over the wall of the city. But the horse struck a piece of copper with his left hoof as he jumped over the wall. Suddenly, the bells and alarms rang out all over the city. The Virgin Tsar awoke and roused all her company. They all mounted horses swift as with wings, and they flew out after the hero. A thief has trespassed in our kingdom and has watered his horse at my well. He has stolen our apples of youth and the water of life and death. Ivan Tsarevich rode on all the way to the old woman. She led out his faithful steed. The Tsar's son jumped down from his exhausted horse, mounted the fresh one, and rode away. Now up the road came her niece, the Virgin Tsar. The old woman came out of her hut and offered her tea and coffee and bade her visit a while. Oh, auntie, I have not the time to rest. Did you not see an idiot ride past here? Ah, my dear child, he will not escape from you. He only rides on a hobby horse. Come and stay with me for a little while as my dear guest. As they were entertaining themselves, the Tsar's son spurred his steed onward and came to the second old woman. She exchanged the tired horse for his loyal steed and bade him to immediately ride onwards. Can't hear you, Lisa.
Thanks. When the Virgin Tsar arrived, the second witch had a similar story as her sister. She related that the simpleton's horse was already stumbling. The third old woman gave Ivan Tsarevich his own horseback and told the old Virgin Tsar that the idiot's horse was only fur and bones. Meanwhile, Ivan Tsarevich rode on and came to the pillar at the crossroads upon which the inscription was written. He thought to himself, I have not won glory as a brave hero. Have I not won glory as a brave hero? Have I made my way on unknown paths? I have fulfilled the wishes of my dear father. Now I will go and seek my brother, Dmitri Tsarevich. He took the left path and came upon a green meadow and saw an enormous house and headed for it. He rode through the gate, reined his horse, and gave him fresh white millet grains. The horse of his brother immediately recognized a newcomer and neighed wildly with all its might. The hero strode to the elegant columns and climbed upon the golden staircase. There, a marvelously beautiful woman came toward him, greeted him warmly, invited him to her chambers, took him to a table, gave him food and drink, and treated him with all kinds of delicacies. When she had fed him, she showed him to a fine bed where he could rest. She wanted Ivan Tsarevich to lie on the side nearest to the wall, but the lad demanded that she herself instead should lie there. For a long time they argued over who should lie there. Then Ivan Tsarevich grabbed her around the waist and threw her against the wall. The revolving bed tipped over, and the woman flew down into a deep cellar. He heard the cries of those who had fallen down and were imprisoned there. God has given us a new companion, Ivan Tsarevich yelled back. Tear her into pieces, for she was your destruction. The bold boys grabbed her. One tore off a hand, and the other a foot, the third her head. Then Ivan Tsarevich let a rope down to them and pulled the adventurous young men back up to their freedom. When he saw his brother Dmitri, he seized him by his white hands, pressed him to his golden chest, kissed him on his sweet lips, and called him his dear brother Dmitri Tsarevich. He then gave his brother food and drink, and they rode back towards their father's castle. But when they came out to the open country, Ivan Tsarevich was overcome by a deep, irresistible sleepiness. 9 days and 9 nights he had ridden without sleeping, without eating, and without drinking. They pitched their tents and took care to rest a while. Ivan Tsarevich fell into a deep sleep. On the 3rd day, Dmitri Tsarevich took the apples of youth and the water of life together from his brother's knapsack and rode off into the kingdom. When Ivan Tsarevich awoke, there was nothing of his possessions to be seen. He quickly saddled up and rode out to the edge of the kingdom. There he removed his saddle and the plaited reins and said to the horse, "Gray brown one, run to the fields to rest. I shall not need you for a while." Ivan Tsarevich went into town on foot and wandered around, staying at the inns with the laborers and visiting the taverns like an idlers and lay about the city. Meanwhile, with great honors, the Tsar welcomed Dmitri Tsarevich and commanded that there should be revelry and dancing. Quickly told is slowly lived. After these events, 3 years passed. Then the Virgin Tsar came into the middle of the night and at the first hour commenced to bombard the Tsar's city with cannons and guns. She demanded the surrender of the guilty one. The Tsar did not know what to do. Who was the criminal he should deliver? So he assembled his ministers and said, "My dear advisors and boyars, let us take counsel if we should answer the Tsarina's wishes and deliver up a criminal." "Merciful Tsar," answered his assembled ministers, "if you so wish it, then we can advise you. Did not Fyodor Tsarevich make mischief in distant lands? Has he not perhaps committed some crime in a foreign kingdom?" And they brought forth Fyodor Tsarevich out of prison and sent him out to the ship. The beautiful Marya with the long tresses saw him coming and ordered the gangway laid down and had it covered with a red carpet. Then 2 wonderfully beautiful little boys ran up and called, dear mother, is our father coming?" "No, my little children," she said, "this is not your dear father, but your eldest uncle who comes. Seize him and stretch him out on the deck. Cut 3 scars on his thighs and 3 scars on his back. He should not meddle in foreign affairs." And again, she bombarded the Tsar's city night and day with her cannons and muskets. This time, they sent Dmitri Tsarevich to the Tsarina's ship, but everything happened as before. The Virgin Tsar then opened fire and bombarded the town with her cannons and muskets. Again, she demanded the surrender of the real guilty one. And again, the Tsars assembled his counselors. "What do you think, my lords? Who among us has committed the crime? Advise me." One of them dared to be brave and answer the Tsar, "Your Imperial Highness, it is your 3rd son who is to blame." He spoke further. "Vanshka, stay at home, the stove sitter, is also a son of the Tsar. It may not be seemly to tell you, but he hangs around in taverns and butcheries and spreads lies all around." The Tsar demanded, "Find him at once and bring him here. Maybe he has committed the crime." They searched for Vanshka in all the pubs and taverns throughout the city. They found him, the Tsar's son, and called him to come to the Tsar and commanded him to look into his father's face. His father demanded that Ivan Tsarevich take the blame he deserved. Vanshka went immediately to the ship, but not by the cleanest way, rather through dirt and rubbish. No one commented. The waiting Tsarina again let down the gangway and covered it with a red carpet as before. The 2 boys came running and cried out, dear mother, does not our father come?" And then the Virgin Tsarina said, "Dear children, take him by his white hands, embrace his golden chest, because your true dear father has come." And the beautiful Marya with the long tresses took his hands so white and named him her chosen husband. "By the seeds you have sown, I will enter into holy marriage with you." And they began to celebrate. The Tsar invited them to feast with great honor. Ivan Tsarevich told of all his deeds and what had befallen him. And he asked his father for his blessing, which is unshakable through all of eternity, to marry the Virgin Tsar according to the law of the land. Because my strength and my wisdom were rest enough, I reached the water of life and death and the apples of youth, and now you, our dear father, shall become younger through them, and may God grant you many years of health. And now I ask you permission to go with the Virgin Tsar into the kingdom under the sun, because I do not wish to sit on a throne in our realm. And he went away into the kingdom under the sun, and lived there happily and joyfully, and wished himself and his Tsarinas and their children long-lasting peace. Now I have told the story just as I heard it.
Well, thank you too. That was pretty impressive. Really long story today. Not that our listeners have not noticed, but to start out with, so there are three sons, and we've had the story before. We've had similar sort of stories where there are three sons who ride out searching for something to claim the kingdom or claim their role as king or find a great treasure or achieve something to liberate the kingdom. In this story, the Virgin Czar, Ivan is our hero. And
we've also had similar story of calling on a little hut to open its doors, and the hut actually turns to reveal an opening to enter.
So doorway to the unconscious opens automatically in the form of a hut. So,
and the hut had chicken legs, which represents Baba Yaga.
Chicken legs.
In the last story that we read, so we know that the hut is Baba Yaga, as well as some of the other characters in the story.
So Baba Yaga is she's a shapeshifter. She's a witch. She's a sorcerer. Mm-hmm. She represents the wild of the forest. So she is both good and evil. And she's also the in-between. She's neither good or evil. She exists. She is the initiation. You have to get through the initiatory. Who is initiating this young person? So there are three sons, Dmitri, Ivan, and Fyodor. And the three of them are the ones who go out into the forest. There are three pathways. Fyodor takes the left pathway. Dmitri takes the right pathway, and Ivan takes the path in the middle. Dmitri is trapped in his path. Fyodor comes back with a copper serpent, which also represents Baba Yaga in this case.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
She is the witch. So he brings her back into shapeshifter, remember? He brings her back into the castle. And the king is very upset with him that he brought back the serpent to the castle, because now evil has come upon the castle, or bad luck in this case. Not necessarily evil, but bad luck has come. When he brings her back to the castle, that's when Dmitri is lost. So Ivan sets out, And Ivan is a little sharper than the other two brothers. The oldest is Fyodor, and the second oldest is Dmitri. So Ivan is the youngest. So consciousness of youth. A new perspective. When we think about consciousness of youth, we think of a new generation, different way of thinking, different way of perceiving things, different way of resolving problems that existed before they came. They're much more conscious than the generation before, because they both inherit the consciousness of the generation before, and they learn from the technology of their time. So they're advanced in two different ways. So any of you who are not tech savvy, usually you look at the kids to solve it for you. Well, the reason is that you look at the kids is not that they all study computers, is they grew up with them. So they speak that language, they understand that language. They understand the language of the social sites, they understand the language of the internet, they understand the language of YouTube, they understand rankings, they understand likes, they understand dislikes, they understand these things. In this story, the youngest is the one who sees a different path. He is not as childish as stupid Ivanko. There is deep psychological transformation that occurs to Ivan as he sets out. He transforms along the path. There's many different ways that he's initiated. The first one is
I think in these three choices of these three brothers,
mm-hmm.
you see in the first two, there are three choices. Go right, save yourself, kill the horse. Go left, kill the horse, or save the horse, kill yourself. And then in the middle path, certain death. So there are these calculated risks involved that the first two brothers calculate their odds, and they're very calculating, and it's all very logical. And then in the third choice, their logic is not a consideration. We're just going to move forward knowing that this is an imminent, or this is a possibility, but knowing that this is the way out also through this choice of facing something that must die to succeed in the end. And delving deeper, he continues a journey that's different than his brothers.
Yeah, so the only way out is to go in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the only way out for him is to go into the danger, to go into oblivion. And then he comes out the other side.
You can't sacrifice your peripherals. You can't sacrifice yourself. You just have to go in and see what comes.
Yeah.
Next.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So he doesn't go on a death mission. He knows something is different about. So he's using intuition.
Mm-hmm.
So let's think of Ivan, because Ivan uses different forms of awareness to solve different problems for himself, because he faces several different problems. It says, as soon as Ivan Tsarevich came out into the open fields, he pulled the nag at the tail and hung the skin on a nail. Here you have her crows and magpies. God has provided you with a meal, he says. Then he roared like an animal in the forest, Willis like a dragon, Soon a horse came galloping so that the moist Mother Earth trembled. Flames blazed from its mouth, sparks flew from its nostrils, right? So these are the horses from the underworld, from Hades. They breathe fire. Right? They're supernatural horses. They don't exist in our realm, but they cross over to our realm. Smoke poured out of its ears, steam rose in the pillars, fire, apples fell from its behind. Ivan Tsarevich took this loyal steed by the reins and stroked it, and suddenly became so quiet that a lad of 3 years could have sat on it. Right? So this is his first kind of test. The first test is to be terrified of the steed, but he pets it, and it turns out that it was sent to him. Then Ivan Tsarevich went into a great deep cellar that his dear grandfather had given him, and ate and drank his fill. He chose the most beautiful plated bridle and a Circassian saddle, mounted this on his gallant steed, pulled the straps tight, picked up his sharp sword, rose up on his steed, and rode out into the open fields. So he took this fire-breathing horse that crapped out flaming apples, and he tamed it. And then after he tamed it, so it was a very difficult task, because what does he have to do? He has to crawl back into the unconscious and feed himself until he's full. Then he has to get out of the unconscious back into, but he's still within the unconscious. Even though it sounds like, but what happens is that when he is able to tame the steed, he has to refill because he's exhausted. And then he comes back, he takes the steed, and then he hits the fields. And then he rode. He came to a pillar at the crossroads where his two brothers had come to pass. So we all hit the same crossroads, and then we have to make a decision. Right? So we've all had our crossroads. It's part of existence. We all hit a crossroads. And then we have to take a path. We have to choose a path. And whatever happens in our crossroads, whatever happens to us on that path, shapes who we are and how we are and who we become. Okay. See you at the crossroads. So we all kind of like walk down the same path, and then we hit the crossroads, and then each person has to choose a path. And each person's crossroads, because the crossroads basically take you to a different reality. Right? Each path is a different reality. Oh, I studied and worked. I'd never studied and I worked. I never worked. I never studied. So each path brings you to a different conclusion about the world and how you see the world and where the world has affected you. Right? Journeys into the depth of the unconscious in these fairy tales is an initiation of the hero. How much can he take? Or how much can she take? How much are they going to be able to overcome? What kind of barriers are there going to be? What kind of threats to their life are going to come. So he travels, but what he faces is the feminine in his travel. And he has to get through the unconscious. The feminine represents the depth of the unconscious. She is the great mother. In the darkness, she lights. He says, he who rides down the middle road will suffer death. Ivan Tsarevich began to weep. He pulled himself together and thought, neither honor nor glory endorse this brave lad. He will ride into the jaws of death. With powerful bonds, he sprang across the open field and drove his good steed onwards. Rivers, lakes passed underneath the hooves. The horse's mane flowed in a grand arc. His tail swept over the earth. The horse and rider soon came. So the horse is not really touching the earth. The horse is above the ground. It's flying. Right? It's flying over rivers. It's flying over lakes. The horse and rider soon came to a green meadow and saw a cottage turning round on legs of chicken with spindle feet. The young man called out, stay still, little hut. Turn your back to the forest and your doors towards me. And there he meets the witch. Now, she's also a sorcerer. She's a shapeshifter, right? So these are very dangerous characters, right? They're shadowy aspects. They're shadow figures. You don't know who you're staring at. Are you staring at an enemy? Or are you staring at your own fear? Are you meeting someone different, or are you meeting parts of yourself? This is what happens when you have shapeshifters. Shapeshifters are archetypal. We've had them through the beginning of the century. Shapeshifter, if you think about it, is the shape that you think you see is not the shape you actually see. By the time you actually see it, it has shifted. So it's almost like an illusion. But in mythology, this illusion had a character, an archetypal character. It's a form of initiation. It either you succumb to it and it breaks you, you think you're crazy, or you're able to figure it out. You're able to go through the initiation and pass. And that's what Tsarevich, Ivan, ends up doing. He wants to go in. He wants to go through the door. Inside sat a little old grandmother. Poking the fire with her nose, she stirred the coals in the oven. So you enter the unconscious, and there is an innocuous, a friendly looking grandmother, not very scary for Ivan. But this is how he addresses her. He says, I will smash your ears together. Your asshole will become the stove door. I will grind your brains in my hands until sand flies out of your ass. My dear old one, you should know that you do not question a hero, but serve him food and drink. So when you meet the shapeshifter, you have to call it out. You can't be fooled by it. If you're fooled by it, then it tortures you. So by his ability to call it out for what it is, right? He's able to conquer it. He's able to not be destroyed by it. Right? So the first task of initiation as a young person in the world, what do? You have to get through high school. That's the old woman. That's high school. Once you are able to get through high school, then you're initiated into a different young adult life. Right? So, she asks him a question. This is part of the path. Do you ride here on your own free will or by compulsion? And he replied, willingly, by thrice as much unwillingly. So this is a riddle. You have to know the answer to the riddle. This is the second form of initiation. This is called college entrance exam. And the college entrance exam for Yvonne is, how did you get here? Were you forced to be here? Or did you come willingly? And his answer is very coy. He basically tells her both. He says, I was dragged here and I also rode willingly. Right? What Jung talks about as your destiny. It either drags you kicking or screaming, or you walk willingly with it. This is what Yvonne says. He says to her, we were three brothers, and the first rode out and brought home only a copper serpent from the copper mountain. My father, the Tsar, threw his brother in jail. The second rode out, and we know nothing about what happened to him. And then I had to take on the service myself to pluck his flowers and to follow in his footsteps. Tell me, dear grandmother, did your father ride far, far in his time? Lie down and sleep, my child, she says. The morning is wiser than the night. The day brings rewards. In the morning, the old woman woke the brave young man, gave him food and drink. Her own good horse took him out on the road and said to him, my elder sister still lives down the way. She knows more about your business than I. So there's more than one of her. So sometimes they appear, Baba Yaga appears as three sisters. And you have to go through the initiation of going through all the sisters. Each sister, so the second sister would be after you finish college or a crafts, you learned a craft. You learn to do something. You learned a way of living in the world without school. But you were initiated into something. You have a craft. You have something that you could use. It doesn't have to be education. It could be something else. It's still a form of understanding and education. Every craft is some form of education, even though it's not college. Life is teaching you constantly. As you go through life, it teaches you over and over again. It teaches you different lessons. So when you graduate from college, you go to work and you find a job. Now, you might have been working when you were going to college or when you're learning your craft. You might have been doing something, but you really start to, because now you've honed your craft. Now you want to work at it. You want to refine it. You want to change it. So you go to the second sister and he blasts off. Remember, he has a supernatural horse. He comes to another hut. He says the same thing. He tells it to stand still and to turn the doorway towards him. And he goes through the doorway, and there, our hero, there sat a woman even older than her sister. She was spinning silk threads, stirred the coals in the oven with her nose, watching over the geese in the field with her eyes. She asked the same question as her sister. She says, Ivan Tsarevich swore back at her in the same way as before. She gave him food and drink, and again, they had the same conversation. And again, in the morning, she gave him food and drink and her own gallant steed. Now, what it sounds like is that every time he crosses the supernatural, every time he comes to a point in his evolution, his individuation process, as if you will, he picks up a new steed. But still, it's a supernatural one. Because what happens when we pass our first initiation? We don't ride out in the world the way we rode in. So our first initiation is honing of our craft when we leave high school, right? High school is our initiation into social affairs, social political affairs. How do we cope with the world, what it looks like, and who's in charge of this world? How are we going to make a place for ourselves in this world? That's what high school is. And that's why when you ride out of high school, you're not the kid who walked into high school. Your consciousness has been shaped in a very, very different way. It's expanded in different ways. It's contracted in different ways. It's moved in certain directions. It's regressed in others. And there's just, every time we face an initiation, a crossroads, if you may, something changes within us because we have made decisions. We get married, we have kids, we made decisions, things happen, things change. We change. Our consciousness, therefore we ride out on a different steed. If you rode in on a buggy, you ride out on the Mazda. If you rode in on Mazda, you ride out in a Honda, and so on and so forth. You never walk in to a place and walk out the same way you walked in. Why? Because when you walk in, your consciousness changes. And therefore, walking out of that place is not the same. It doesn't matter if you just looked around, your consciousness has changed. So when you walk into a place and when you walk out of the place. So with this young Ivan, he walks into the second place and he passes his second test. He's getting smart about how to go on in life. Huh? So he takes out the steed the next morning and he goes on his way. And around midday, you will come to the kingdom under the sun, she says to him. There rules a virgin as a czar. She is called the beautiful Maria with long tresses. Her bed is raised on 9 pillars. She sleeps on this resting place until noon. But then you must be quick and jump straight over the walls of the city. So you had the older woman, then you had a much older sister. Now you have a virgin. This is the third sister, right? This is the third test. The third test, in the garden there stands a young apple tree. Nearby lies the water of both life and death. For this reason, did your father once write here, fill 2 glasses, one with the water of life and one with the water of death. But first test their power. Rip apart a young raven. On the right side of the pool is the water of life, on the left hand of the water of death. So, to understand the meaning of the water of life and water of death, you have to test it. By tearing a raven apart. Right? Ravens are a symbol of knowing. So how do you start to know more? It's by tearing it apart. How do you rebuild? You tear apart. When something is torn apart, it has to be put back together again. But if it's put together and you don't understand it, that's why Legos. So if you've ever played with Legos, you always want to tear it apart just to see if you can put it back together again. This is a pattern with us. This is the pattern. This is the way we learn. This is the way we change. This is the way we create. So, Ivan Tsarevich rode off, came to the kingdom of the sun. Symbolic, right? Kingdom of the sun. In the kingdom of the sun, because the sun is the symbol of gold, of life. Caught a young raven, tore it into 2 pieces. He sprinkled it with the water of death, and the raven's body grew back together. Then he sprinkled with water of life, and the raven flew away. Now the young hero wanted to enter the chambers of the Virgin Tsar, Maria the beautiful, with long tresses above her, and observe how she slept until noontime. So he enters the room. Now he has to enter. Remember the first test and the second test, he passed with flying ease. Now this is the third test. He holds both, the water of life and the water of death, and the apple of youth, right? All these are archetypal symbols. Yeah, Lise.
I want to go back to the when he went to the third sister and she reveals to him yet the next step to go to the sun palace, or I forgot the name.
Yeah.
But she did say here, you must do this, you must do that. Over here is the apple tree and the water of life and death. For this reason did your father once ride here. So this is where he becomes the son following in his father's footsteps.
Correct.
He's taking these, maybe plucking the apple tree flowers or something, but this is where he is coming to coming to the next step in his growth, and becoming not the youngest son, but he's gone through these layers, depths of journey, and coming to this, and yet deeper in his consciousness towards his where he's supposed to be. Just want to throw that in there.
Yeah. Beautiful. Perfect. So I'll use that as my segue. So, like Lisa just told us, the maiden was more beautiful than he imagined. When she drew in her breath, the door closes. When she let out her breath, the doors opened again. And now he finds about love. He finds the strange mystery of love. She's so beautiful. He's in love. She takes a breath, the doors open up, the heavens open. When she lets it out, when she takes it in, she closes heaven. When she's holding her breath, she keeps him at bay. So he's in love. This is love. And he's aroused. It says, when she drew in her breath, the door closed. When she let the breath out, the doors open again. What does my honor matter? The young hero said in his heart. I will give my horse to drink by this virgin. He could see her perfect body right through her nightgown, right through to her heart. See, another symbol of love, the heart. So this is what we talk about, being in love with the body and soul. The heart, soul, body. He was on fire and he wished to fulfill his desire. The maiden noticed nothing of what he had in mind, and he lay with her and took his pleasure. Then he went softly and quietly out of the chambers and came to the wide courtyard. There stood his horse, and it was very tired. He led it to the well and washed it with fresh water from head to foot. He then gathered the apples of youth from the apple tree, filled his knapsack, drew the water of life and death in 2 glasses, and rode out of the realm as fast as he could. As he mounted his brave steed, they sped away. He spurred on, striking his strong thighs, and they sprang over the wall of the city. But the horse struck a piece of copper with its left hoof as it jumped over the wall. Suddenly, the bells and alarms rang out of all over the city. The Virgin Tsar awoke and roused all her company. They all mounted horses swift as the wings. They flew out after our hero. So he stole her virginity. He stole her purity. And he ran. Right? So another step goes the wrong way. You fall in love. You think it's love, maybe it's lust. But it doesn't stop there. Things become complicated. Alarm bells go. The virgin is awake. You can't mess with the virgin. Now you have to deal with the aftermath of what you initiated. When the Virgin Tsar arrived, the second witch had a similar story as her sister. She related that the simpleton's horse was already stumbling, so she started calling him the simpleton. The third old woman gave Ivan Tsarevich his own horse back and told the Virgin Tsar that the idiot's horse is only firm bones. Meanwhile, Ivan Tsarevich rode on to came to the pillar at the crossroads upon which the inscription was written. He thought to himself, have I not won glory as a brave hero? Just when you think you have achieved everything and got everything you ever wanted, it no longer has meaning. Now you have to go through the crossroads again. Now you have to choose a different path. He says, he thought to himself, have I not won glory as a brave hero? I have made my way on unknown paths. I have fulfilled the wishes of my dear father. Now I will go seek my brother, Dmitry Tsarevich. He took the left path and came upon a green meadow and saw an enormous house and headed for it. He rode through the gate and reined his horse and gave him fresh white milk grains. The horse of his brother immediately recognized the newcomer, nailed wildly with all its might. The hero strode to the elegant columns and climbed up the golden staircase. There, a marvelous, beautiful woman came toward him, greeted him warmly, and invited him to her chambers. Shapeshifter, remember the shapeshifter, right? She's in his path all the way around. Throughout his initiation, he has to face the shapeshifter. So he faced the old women, the witches, he faced the virgin, and now he encounters a maiden who summons him to her bed. Right? This is a very different form of the feminine. This is the more assertive part of the feminine. Right? This is the part of the feminine that takes control. Now he has to face it. And this is what happens. There's a marvelous, beautiful woman came toward him, greeted him warmly, invited him to her chambers, took him to a table, gave him food and drink, treated him with all kinds of delicacies. When she had fed him, she showed him to a fine bed where he could rest. She wanted Ivan Tsarevich to lie on the side nearest the wall. But the lad demanded that she herself instead should lie there. For a long time, they argued over who should lie where. Then Ivan Tsarevich grabbed her around the waist and threw her against the wall. The revolving bed tipped over and the woman flew down into a deep cellar. He heard the cries of those who had fallen down and were imprisoned there. So he faced the witch, threw her through the wall. She ended up being trapped by her own trap that she set for him. Again, shapeshifter. God has given us a new companion. Ivan Tsarevich yelled back, tear her into pieces, for she was your destruction. The bold boys grabbed her. One tore off a hand, the other a foot, the third her head. Then Ivan Tsarevich let a rope down to them and pulled the adventurous young men back up to their freedom. When he saw his brother Dmitry, he seized him by his white hands and pressed him to his golden chest, kissed him on his sweet lips, and called him his dear brother Dmitry Tsarevich. He then gave his brother food, drink, and they rode back towards their father's castle. Dr. Eric, you want to take it from here?
I'm not sure where to go with it, to be honest with you. I mean, I think that to be honest with you, I'm struggling a little bit with his evolution. I mean, I understand that she is a sorceress. I understand that she is a magician of sorts, has a lot of binary kinds of power. and yet I had a little bit, I don't know, maybe this is just me being prudish, but I had a little bit of problems with him when he was passing his third test, with him having all these feelings toward her, and she had no idea what he was wanting. It said she had no idea what he was thinking. And the next thing you know, he's making children with her. And I'm trying to justify this. And I'm just being honest. I'm having a little bit of a struggle justifying it.
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, he does take advantage of her, that's for sure. Now the question would be whether that was a setup.
And that's a good question.
That's the question that would be. Because the second witch prepares him for the third. She tells him what is in the castle. She tells him what he needs. She tells him where to go. And she guides him into that one. So I think this is all part of the creation myth here. That this is how he ends up creating children. And she ends up as the maternal figure. Because he has to go to the feminine, and the feminine is both destructive, it's menacing, it's tempting, it's all the old stories and all the old myths of the Bible. The feminine is dangerous, is devouring. It's a serpent. It's a sorcerer. So yeah, I could understand what your irritation is about, because that's how they are looking at Baba Yaga.
Yeah.
They're not looking at her in a more, neutral way.
Yeah. I mean, it almost felt like I kept asking myself, well, gosh, is she a willing participant in all this? The czarist.
Yes, but the Virgin Tsar is the creation, creation, because she lives in the kingdom of the sun. She is the creation of the two witches. That is the third sister. Then the third sister becomes menacing in the fourth, the chambermaid. She's the one who tries to kill him, right? And that's a retribution for what he did to the third sister, right? He has to pay a price, but he gets away with it again.
Well, one thing is for sure, they both evolved at the end.
Yes.
And that gave me, some relief in that one matter that I had, and that just could be my own issue. But they did both get resolved. But for a while, she wanted the criminal. She wanted the criminal that and it was the guy
violated her. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes,
absolutely. Yes, this is a violation. Yes, absolutely, he violated her. He watched her while she was sleeping. Yeah, he violated her. Oh, he didn't. There was no willingness there was no consent. This is not a story of consent for sure. No, this is a story of the way the feminine is viewed.
Yeah.
From a mythological, historical standpoint in this culture. But this form of feminine is the interpretation of the feminine in the Bible, which is it's evil. So Baba Yaga's portrayal in this story is evil, even though she is actually quite helpful to him. She doesn't menace him. He's the one who ends up menacing. So Ivan Savage was overcome by a deep, irresistible sleepiness. 9 days and 9 nights had he ridden without sleeping, without eating, without drinking. They pitched their tents, took care to rest, while Ivan Savage fell into a deep sleep. On the third day, Dmitry Tsarevich took the apples of youth and the water of life together from his brother's knapsack and rode off into the kingdom. Even when you think you have made it, and you are only miles from home, another fork in the road hits. And you end up in a battle that you are not ready or aware is going to occur. He stole his saddle, and he said to his horse, "Great brown one, run to the fields to rest. I shall not need you for a while." Ivan Savage went to the town on foot and wandered around, staying at the inns and laborers, visiting the taverns like the idlers, laybouts of the city. Meanwhile, with great honor, the Tsar welcomed Dmitry Tsarevich and commanded there should be a revelry, a dancing, a quickly told, as slowly lived after these events. 3 years passed. Then the Virgin Tsar came in the middle of the night. At the first hour, commenced to bombard the Tsar's city with cannons and guns. She demanded the surrender of the guilty one. The Tsar did not know what to do. Who was the criminal that she should deliver? She wanted to rain holy terror on him. So he assembled his ministers and said, "My dear advisors and boyars, let us take counsel if we should answer the Tsarina's wishes and deliver up the criminal." Merciful Tsar answered his assembled ministers, "If you so wished it, we can advise you. Did not Fyodor Savage make his mischief in the distant lands? Has he not perhaps committed some crime in a foreign kingdom? Let's sacrifice the oldest son." And they brought Fyodor Savage out of prison and sent him out to the ship. The beautiful Mara with the long tresses saw him coming, ordered the gangway laid, and had it covered with a red carpet. Then 2 wonderful, beautiful little boys ran up and called, dear mother, is our father coming?" "No, my little children," she said, "this is not your dear father, but your oldest uncle who comes. Seize him, stretch him out on the deck, cut 3 scars on his thighs and 3 scars on his back. He should not meddle in foreign affairs." And again, she bombarded the Tsar's city nights and days with her cannons and muskets. She was on the warpath. This time they sent Dmitry Savage to Tsarina's ship, but everything happened as before. The Virgin Tsar then opened fire, bombarded the town with her cannons and muskets again. She demanded the surrender of the real guilty one. So she wanted his ass. Again, the Tsar assembled his counselors. "What do you think, my lords? Who among us has committed the crime? Advise me." One of the lords who among us has committed the crime, advised me. One of them dared to be brave and answered the Tsar, "Your Imperial Highness, the father's sin. It is your 3rd son who is to blame." He spoke further. "Venishka, stay at home. The stove sitter is also a son of the Tsar. It may not be seemly to tell you, but he hangs around in taverns and butters and spreads lies all around. The Tsar demanded, fight him at once, bring him here. Maybe he has committed the crime." They searched for Venishka. In all the pubs and taverns throughout the city, they found him. The Tsar's son called him to come to the Tsar and commanded him to look into his father's face. His father demanded that Ivan Tsarevich take the blame, and he deserved. Vanishka went immediately to the ship, but not by the cleanest way, rather through dirt and rubbish.
I'd like to put in a note here in the footnotes. Vanishka is a form of endearment for Ivan. So it's not some long lost brother that just popped in here. This really is Ivan.
This is Ivan,
Yeah.
No one commented the waiting. Thank you
Thank
for the clarification.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa.
No one commented the waiting. Tsarina again let down the gangway and covered it with red carpet as before. The two pigs came running and cried out, dear mother, does not our father come? Then said the Virgin Tsarina, dear children, take him by his white hands, embrace his golden chest, because your true dear father has come. And the beautiful Mara with the long tresses took his hands so white and named her chosen husband. Now, if this was written by a woman, I think this is where the story ends. She would have deciphered him into 4 different pieces and threw him into the water. But the story is not written by a woman. So, by the seeds that you have sown, she says, I will enter into holy marriage with you. And they began to celebrate. The Tsar invited them to a feast with great honor. Ivan Tsarevich told all his deeds, what had befallen him, and he asked his father for his blessing, which is unshakable through all eternity. To marry the Virgin Czar, according to the law of the land, because my strength, my wisdom will rest enough, I reached the water of life and death, the apples of youth, and now you, our dear father, shall become younger through them, and may God grant you many years of health. And now I ask you for permission to go to the Virgin Tsar into the kingdom under the sun, because I do not wish to sit on a throne in our realm. He went away into the kingdom under the sun and lived there happily and joyfully, and wished themselves, their children, long-lasting peace. Now I have told the story just as I heard it, which might be how they heard it, or it might not be how they heard it, maybe how they finished it.
Yeah.
So I think Dr. Aaron made a really important point. It was not consensual. So he could not be made king of the world he lived in. He had to live in her world. In her kingdom, in the end. So the Virgin Tsar.
That was a complicated story.
Yeah, a lot of trauma.
A lot of trauma.
A lot of trauma. That was our story for today. We look forward to taking you on another adventure next week. It's the IFC's Individuation podcast. I am Dr. Lahab Al-Samarrai. This is Dr. Lisa Hong, and that is Dr. Eric Tomlinson. And we are the IFC's Individuation podcast. And until next time, from the IFC's affirmations from I am not afraid.
I am not afraid.
I am not afraid.
We are the Institute for Conflict, and we are not afraid. We will see you next week.